It really begins with, I call it a petit mort, a little death. What is a story that must die in order for a brave new story to come to life?
Today we're joined by Vika Victoria, a storytelling specialist and founder of Stories That Shift. Born in the former Soviet Union, Vika's quest for purpose led her on a transformative backpacking adventure around the world. Now she empowers leaders and teams with storytelling methodologies, catalyzing change on a cultural level. Join us as we delve into Vika's fascinating journey and the power of stories to drive transformation. Vika, why do you have blue hair?
Why not? The story is, when my grandmother and I were walking down the street in Santa Monica, I saw this woman in her 80s with bright purple hair, and I was just about to turn 30, and I said, Grams, that is so cool. One day in my 80s, I'm gonna have purple hair. She went, Victoria, you're crazy. And I was like, you're right. Why would I wait 50 years? I'll just do it next month.
Is the American dream still an exciting and true story today?
For some, but I think what I'm part of is the neo-American dream. My parents came over for the American dream. We made it happen. And then we saw that actually the story of success wasn't true. The day the story died for me was the day I closed the biggest check of my career. And I was miserable inside. I was overweight, I was overworked, and I was overly bought into the story of the American dream with no re-examination of the cost I paid for that dream.
Hello and welcome to Kaplankaya on the southwestern Aegean coast of Turkey. We are recording the podcast, the Harvest series, where we interview amazing speakers, practitioners and artists joining the Harvest Summit. I hope you will enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Harvest Series podcast. Today we're joined by Vika Victoria, a storytelling specialist and founder of Stories That Shift. Born in the former Soviet Union, Vika's quest for purpose led her on a transformative backpacking adventure around the world. Now she empowers leaders and teams with storytelling methodologies, catalyzing change on a cultural level. Join us as we delve into Vika's fascinating journey and the power of stories to drive transformation. We'll talk about Vika's personal story and how she teaches storytelling. We'll keep some short questions for the end. Hello, Vika.
Hello, Rose.
So nice to have you here. You're the first podcast, and we shared a taxi yesterday. We met at the airport, and for me, it's always important, the first interview, and I'm very happy it's with you because we already connected.
Exactly.
So my first question won't be very original, and I'm sure a lot of people have already asked you this before, but can you tell us your story?
How much time do you
cannot
have?
Keep it. And that's a challenge to shorten it.
Exactly.
Your story from growing up in the former Soviet Union.
Yeah, beautiful start. Well, that's exactly where we'll go back. In 1989, my family immigrated from the Soviet Union to the US as political asylum, white card refugees, and we made it over to the US with this big American dream. And I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, went to Georgia Tech, graduated into the worst economic recession of our time. My dad walked out in a really nasty divorce, and instead of going to therapy, I just booked a one-way ticket to Vietnam. And alone, solo backpacked Southeast Asia for the next 6 months. And I realized that I had it so good, actually. And by working at orphanages and meeting people from all over the world, I understood that perspective is the greatest medicine. And I started asking different questions and connecting to people in new ways. And so I moved to New York on accident and got into advertising. And so I took everything I learned from backpacking into the world of advertising. And in that decade, I really filled out a whole career. But I had saved every commission check that entire time because I knew that I wanted to get back on the road. And so at the end of my time, I left and I embarked on a 28-month solo backpacking adventure around the world. This time I had plenty in the bank for a semi-early retirement, and so I decided to follow my highest curiosities, and I trained with world-class teachers from Esther Perel to Bessel van der Kolk to Gabor Mate, to, I mean, so much, from meditation to mindfulness to masculinity. And I started performing storytelling. And I, at this point, ended up winning the Moth. Someone asked me to speak, and I said, this is a career? I had no idea. And so this whole new world opened up, and I opened up a storytelling advisory because what I realized, my thesis was, come to me with a problem and there's a story-based solution. And so over the last 7 years in this advisory, I have served big companies like Boston Consulting Group, world-renowned leaders. I've spoken on stages. I've created an online course and my own show on YouTube. And it's all about the power of narrative.
And can you elaborate on how your speaking career was born after you were discovered on YouTube?
Yeah. So I, in advertising, had this one client, Kyle, and he kept saying, Vika, you gotta do the Moth. You were born to tell stories. I said, there's no way, Kyle, that I'm gonna get on stage in front of 300 people. He's like, you do it in the boardroom at Coca-Cola every week. And he got sick. He got cancer. And I was checking in on him, and he said, tell me you did the Moth. And in that moment, I felt so guilty because he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. So the very next week, I went to the Moth, and I was mesmerized by how in a city like New York, where you feel so disposable and invisible, 300 people sat in total silence, giving space, 5 minutes for 10 individuals to share their story. And it was so intoxicating on a cultural level. I raced home and I made my first Moth. And a few months later, I ended up winning. And someone found me on YouTube, and they messaged me and they said, you have this electric style of storytelling. Could you teach at this gathering in Costa Rica? And I just said yes, because I'd figure it out. So imagine, Rose, what is the thing that you do better than most people, and you have to teach it in 5 steps on stage to a couple hundred people? That's how my speaking career started.
You experience a bit fear or discomfort to speak in public. Do you still experience this or not at all now?
Not at all now, because what I recognized was it's just excitement. It's the story you tell yourself about the fear. And I'm very lucky that I grew up as a competitive ballroom dancer. So I've been dancing on stages in front of hundreds of people. You just want me to get on stage and not shake my booty in 3-inch heels? You just want me to talk? I can talk. That's not a problem.
But you experience that a lot, like people, would you think it's the biggest fear of people, like to be seen in public?
Yeah, it actually is. In the US, it's considered the #1 fear is speaking in public. And I think if we dig a few layers deeper, it's the real fear to be seen, because most of us feel like we're faking it. And so if somebody sees through us, they're going to see that this is all just smoke and mirrors. And so the work that I do with leaders is to help them believe in themselves and move from a space of confidence, which I see as a one-night stand with the ego, to a space of conviction, which is a lifelong partnership with an inner knowing.
And can you explain how storytelling can help leaders change their relationship with change?
Yeah. So I'll tell you a little story. I was working with a leader at a big top strategy firm. Every week, he was having a really hard time with the enormity of stress. And I said, listen, is the market going to get any easier? He said, no. And I said, are conditions going to continue to accelerate in terms of demand? He said, yeah. I was like, so if you can't control what's happening in the outer world, can you control your inner world? Can you change your relationship to the story you tell yourself about stress? And that was his big aha moment. And so instead of resisting the stress, he started to get excited by it. And the story was, I told him, you are the superhero of your story. So let's create an alter ego. How would the superhero version of you react to that email coming in at 2:00 in the morning? And then it became playful. And I think that's what storytelling is, such an incredible tool of joy and play, if only we knew how to wield it correctly.
What led you to specialize in storytelling for leaders?
Yeah, I like to work with people who are making an impact, with people who are leaving this world better than how they found it. And what I have found in leaders is the same qualities that I admire in my friends. They are unapologetically on a mission to seek understanding, perspective, and impact.
Yeah. Do you think storytelling can play a huge role in personal growth and transformation? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think when I say storytelling, there's an education that has to happen because most people think about storytelling as a nice to have. Oh, yeah, I'd like to be a better public speaker. But that's one tiny part of storytelling. The real myth of storytelling as leaders is we focus so much on the stories we tell the world, but so little on the stories we tell ourselves. And it really begins from the inside out. And so my approach is much more holistic than most because I've worked with the most successful people, and you would be shocked by how sad the stories they tell themselves are and how those stories are limiting them from becoming who they want to become.
Yeah, you said you studied with a bit Gabor Maté and Esther Perel, so you touched a little bit the trauma because people, of course, we discussed a little bit about this in the taxi together. People tell awful stories to themselves, usually, about themselves, like what they think, like awful stuff, like and that needs to be reframed. Do you help people to reframe this?
Yeah, I have a methodology, and I'm so glad you touched on that because we weren't born telling those stories. No baby is born saying, I'm not enough, I'm worthless, I'll never be good enough. We inherit them. And so I have a process that was actually inspired by my grandmother. I was sitting at her kitchen table one day and she was saying, Vika, what do you do? I need to tell my friends, what do you do? It's so confusing. And I saw these Ukrainian nesting dolls right behind her on the bookshelf. And I thought, that's what I do. Baba, I help people see all of the stories of their family, all of the stories of their culture, all of the stories of their society as they're folding into each other. And once you bring that level of awareness to a leader or to anyone, suddenly it loses its power because it's no longer the invisible thread that's driving your behavior, but you're actually conscious. And so conscious storytelling is the way forward for all humanity.
Yeah, so this is the opposite of manipulation because do you have a lot of people telling you storytelling is actually a form of manipulation?
It is a form of manipulation. In the way that dancing is a form of manipulation, in the way that painting is, it's creative manipulation. It's what you do with it that counts. And so when you're telling your kid to eat broccoli and you're making up a story about it, that's a very clever, useful manipulation. And leaders can use this in the most positive light to manipulate their teams to feel a deeper sense of engagement so that they retain top talent, so that they make the impossible possible through storytelling.
So you say you had a methodology for reframing. What are some practical tips for leaders who want to improve their storytelling? Can you share a few?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really begins with, I call it a petit mort, a little death. What is a story that must die in order for a brave new story to come to life? And so practically speaking, imagine your life as a garden of stories, and there's a weed, and that weed is sucking out vital nutrients from the soil of your soul. And so identify what is the highest leverage weed in the garden of your life and pull it out at the roots, because if you cut it off at the top, it'll grow back. And in this process, really be grateful. There's stories of survival that got you where you are. And what I notice time and time again is leaders have this resistance to getting rid of those stories because it makes me work hard. It is the thing that has fueled my success. And I said, sure, but imagine who you could be if you just thanked it and created space for a seedling of a brave new story. And so it's this constant process as you go through your day to be self-reflective and ask yourself, is this true, or is this just a story I invented about myself that I've repeated so many times that it feels like the truth, but it's not?
That's very hard because, and again, we discussed this, but intellectually, you can understand that your story is not the good one. Like you can, but how to feel it and how to wake up in the morning and the story is dead.
Yeah.
How do you embody that? Do you have like another, something like more physical or?
Yeah, it's a writing practice.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a writing practice to the story. So you animate the story as if it was a human being. And you just write, dear story of self-worth, of failure, of rejection. Thank you for all the gifts you've given me. You got me here, but you're not going to get me where I'm going. In your place, I am planting the seedling of I am more than enough. And I will be a gardener of this seed. And this is how I will nurture this seed over time. And that's when you commit to your action plan. So it is actually quite practical. My work merges the science and the secrets. And so the science of this is that you see it on paper, you make a commitment, and then you keep that paper up when you're brushing your teeth. And so you're constantly making yourself aware of the bullshit story. And it doesn't have that power over you anymore.
That's really powerful. I saw you writing on your, I think writing is very, indeed very important for you. I saw you writing something on your book. What did you write before the interview?
So I've learned it really matters to capture a prayer, a wish, an intention. And so I wrote, may Rose and I have a sincere conversation that plants seedlings of possibility in the hearts of all that listen. And that, as a teacher, is my highest hope, is that something we share here will create an opportunity for someone to see the world through a new lens.
The salon you made with men,
Yeah.
you talk with them, you made them talk, you made them share. I'm really interested in this story. And if you want to share what you discovered about masculinity, what was your method, and the lessons you took from this.
Yeah, you dug deep. Thank you. It's probably the richest project that I've taken on. So 6 years ago, in the wake of my grandfather's death, I found myself living with two dear guy friends. And I was in a spiral of sadness. And the things that helped get me out was psychology, philosophy, and psychedelics. And so we would talk about these three topics every night, and I would cook them dinner. And then they would invite their guy friends, and we would talk about dating and crypto and everything in between. And I was the only woman really kind of holding court for these men to have different kinds of conversations. And they said, we wouldn't talk about this if you weren't here. And so I started to realize that there's this real cross-pollination of insights that happens when men and women come together in a very intentional way. And my vision was, what if I could help build bridges of understanding and compassion about the opposite sex? And so I was speaking at this conference later that summer, Tech Open Air, on hacking human connection. And I said, would it be possible for me to have a second opening? I'd love to talk about what I'm learning about masculinity. They said, oh, this is incredible, a woman studying men. And then they agreed, and I said, oh shit, I've got to actually do this. And so for the next 3 weeks, I hosted men's dinners, and I talked to every man on planes, trains, and automobiles. I came up to construction workers and I said, what does it mean to be a man today? And I just fully immersed myself through the lens of a student. I realized very quickly that I knew nothing. And that was the best place to start, because then I was just a sponge. And so I created a few traditions for these dinners, because what I was doing is really unorthodox. I was gathering 4 to 8 men who had never met before, who I handpicked in cities all over the world for a night of philosophical discourse on the nature of what it means to be a man. And I cooked a 5-course meal and got to be like a rookie chef. But it was almost like a reality TV show, because I would land in a city and I would imagine Anthony Bourdain on one shoulder, Frida Kahlo on the next. I had 2 hours to go to the market or the grocery store. None of the products were in English. I'd have to haul 6 bags back up the stairs to one of the guy's apartments. He wasn't there, so I had to figure out pots, pans, knives, spices, and I don't believe in recipes. So everything was just intuitive. And then I had maybe less than 90 minutes to cook all of this. And in the back of my head, think about who are the personalities coming and how do I want them to connect. And it was so high octane, but also the most fun I have ever had. The conversational depth that we reached was unlike any other. And I learned so much about men by asking questions. And they, in turn, sometimes would treat me like one of the guys. And sometimes they would turn to me and ask, hey, so this is really confusing about women. And I would have to give it on behalf of all women.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
And so it was so heartwarming. And there were themes that emerged universally across all. And so as I write this book now, it's so clear to me that we're so much more the same than we are different. That all of the insecurities that me and my girlfriends face, these guys have faced too. And there's conversations that are so critical to understanding each other that are laden in shame and fear to be shared out loud. And so my next vision is to have one of these men's dinners on video.
Wow, great idea.
Thank you.
Yeah. And did you have like sometimes animated debates, or was it always like very peaceful?
Oh, there were animated debates. We got into it. Yeah,
Really? Okay.
Around the patriarchy, around race, around just what, in different cultures, what it means to be a man.
Yeah.
And I think what was really lovely was we were able to respectfully disagree and hear each other's opinions. But there was, in some cities when I didn't have friends, I would ask for people to nominate people. And I remember there was this one guy from Greece, and he was so confused by the entire experience. And he was like, I don't have women friends. And I said, why? He said, well, women are just for pleasure. And I was like, oh, brother, if you don't have sisters guiding you, you are missing out. And so that sparked a really healthy debate.
Wow, great.
Yeah.
Do you think like stories, sharing a story, of course, facilitate connection?
Absolutely. We started every dinner by giving each man 5 minutes to share his story about what most influenced him from his family, culture, and society as a man.
So little questions for you, but before I'd like to, I know it's tricky for you because, and maybe if you don't want to answer, that's okay, but you come from the former Soviet Union, you lived in the US, now you moved, but geopolitically, the story is very difficult now.
Yeah.
What do you think about the story of the world today?
It's really painful. I'm also Jewish. We almost moved to Israel instead of immigrating to the US.
Okay, so that's...
So both sides of my lineage
yeah.
are under siege. I think we have to really anchor in how lucky we are. My worst day is most people's best day. And I learned that even before the wars broke out, just from backpacking and seeing how much privilege we really, truly do live in. And the responsibility that comes with that. When the war broke out in Ukraine, the city that got bombed first was Kharkiv. That is my birth city.
Oh,
and my
wow.
dream was always to take my mother back. And I remember watching the news on February 24th till 3 o'clock in the morning, and a few hours later, I had a call with one of my biggest accounts ever. And I got on that call, and before I was so excited, and now I was numb. And I closed the deal, I got the contract, I called my mom, and I was like, I don't even feel like celebrating. And she explained to me what was ahead. And she did it without almost any emotion, because she had already lived through this regime. She knew what he was capable of. And I just burst into tears because I knew that this would affect the world in massive ways. And yet most of us would turn a blind eye to it because that's our nature and that's also our privilege. And so what I ask people to do is to use your voice to free others. That was the message that I had, is if you are free, you must free others. If you have a voice, you must be a voice for others.
Wow, beautiful, Vika.
Yeah.
Time for quick questions now about probably storytelling. What is a better question than what do you do when you meet someone?
Ooh. When was the last time you felt aliver than alive?
If someone asks you, what do you do? How should your answer be?
So I'll share this with you. Version 1, ask me, what do you do?
What do you do, Vika?
I'm a keynote speaker, storyteller, and strategist. My work lives at the intersection of cultivating relational intelligence, emotional intelligence, and narrative intelligence. Version 2, ask me again.
What do you do, Vika?
I'm a DJ of human connection. Stories are my vinyl.
Okay.
Right?
I see. Okay.
Do you see? So how did that feel for
Wow.
you?
Yeah, I see the joy in the second one.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
And the
Yeah.
intrigue.
Yeah.
When people ask you what you do, that's not the moment to give your resume. That's the moment to spark curiosity
Okay.
in their brain. Because then norepinephrine, this neurotransmitter, floods their system and they focus. And in a world of living in an attention economy, the only thing that we really need is to captivate people's attention. So make sure that when people ask, what do you do? It's one sentence that hooks them in with intrigue.
Yeah. And then you want to ask more questions.
Exactly.
Okay. When people ask you, how old are you, or anything you don't want to answer, what do you tell them? How do you avoid questions you don't want to answer to?
Comedy. you make the awkwardness funny. And you would say, well, I wouldn't ask you how many people you've slept with, would I? And then something like that, something so absurd so that they can feel and empathize with the absurdity of the situation.
Vika, why do you have blue hair?
Why not?
I love them, by the way.
The story is when my grandmother and I were walking down the street in Santa Monica, I saw this woman in her 80s with bright purple hair, and I was just about to turn 30, and I said, Grams, that is so cool. One day in my 80s, I'm going to have purple hair. She went, Victoria, you're crazy. And I was like, you're right. Why would I wait 50 years? I'll just do it next month. And so on the eve of my 30th birthday, I dyed my hair electric purple.
And I started with purple.
I started with purple, and I had it for 5 years. And I walked into my birthday party, and my mom looked at me, and I thought she'd hate it. And she goes, Hani, it actually looks quite natural on you. So, yeah, I love it. I think it's important to wave your freak flag in whichever way you can. And I don't even remember that I have blue hair because it feels like such a natural expression of the aliveness inside of me. But what I do notice is that it gives other people permission to talk to me, to start a conversation. And little kids think that I'm a mermaid, and it's the coolest. Yeah.
Is it better to be kind with someone and not tell your truth, or always authentic, whatever the cost on the relationship?
I think kindness is a form of authenticity because it means that you are sincerely empathizing with the other person's experience. I think it is cruel to be overly honest. If it's coming at the cost of someone's heart, it's cruelty. It's not honesty.
Okay. Are liars better at storytelling?
Liars are better at persuasion. I've seen some liars that suck at storytelling, but they're mighty persuasive when they do it.
What are the qualities you need to be a good storyteller?
Well, I have a whole framework. Sincerity, above all. It's actually the highest frequency, scientifically, even above love.
Okay.
We have this internal bullshitometer. You can tell when somebody's faking or performing. So the first thing you have to do is not speak from your head, not speak from your heart, but speak from this gut, from this inner knowing place. Other things, a really kind storyteller is one that knows what to omit. So instead of the story feeling like a Jackson Pollock piece, it's got smooth lines like a miroir. And it's less is more. We're always in cognitive overload. So if you can tell a story succinctly, you give a great gift to your audience.
Is the American dream still an exciting and true story today?
For some, but I think what I'm part of is the neo-American dream. My parents came over for the American dream. We made it happen. And then we saw that actually the story of success wasn't true. The day the story died for me was the day I closed the biggest check of my career. And I was miserable inside. I was overweight, I was overworked, and I was overly bought into the story of the American dream with no re-examination of the cost I paid for that dream. And so I think the neo-American dream is redefining success. What does it actually mean to be successful today is very different than our parents' generation. If before money was the highest value, what I'm noticing now is freedom. If before people chased power, now people really chase peace. And so the dream is changing, and the politics are not supporting the dream. And so I'm noticing a lot of young talent actually moving out of the US.
Okay. Who's the best storytellers of all time for you?
Oh my gosh. My grandfather.
Oh, really?
Oh, we grew up with so little means, but such richness. You know, he couldn't take us to the mall or Chuck E. Cheese. He would take us on long walks through the woods. He would paint entire worlds with his storytelling. I remember he would take us, me specifically, to the cemetery and do math by the death date and the birth date. And I remembered there was this one moment where it was a child. And as a kid, I never realized that kids could die. And he saw that I was getting upset, and he said, "Tell me a story about her." And I just realized that I could make up stories. And so I think my grandfather was my greatest influence in storytelling. Bill Hicks is a phenomenal storyteller. He's, pre-George Carlin, one of the greatest philosophical storytellers. Dave Chappelle tells story like no one else. He happens to be a comedian, but at the core, he's really a storyteller. There's all the backpackers that I met backpacking, living in hostels, sleeping for, 12, 15 cents a night with Irishmen. Culturally, storytelling is revered in so many different countries, and I'm glad to see this upswelling happening now around the importance of story.
You were mentioning the story your grandfather made you tell at the cemetery. Was it like a pivotal moment and one of the first time you were aware of saying a story?
Yeah. I think that was I think because it was the shock that a child could die, there was just this awareness that he's not the only one who can tell stories. He kind of handed the baton on to me. And then I started babysitting really young when I was 10 years old. And I would never let the kids watch television. So it was now my turn to be my grandpa and walk through the woods and tell stories.
Okay. And did your parents read you lots of stories when you were a child?
Yeah, they did. And actually, I have my mother to thank for my comfort in storytelling. She recognized from a very young age that I was talkative, that I made friends with strangers. And so she would have me memorize Pushkin poetry. And then at birthday parties and dinners, she would put me on top of the dinner table as a 2.5, 3-year-old, and I would recite. And so my brain was literally primed with some of the greatest writers of our generation.
So you were trained as a child?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. What ways do you see storytelling contributing to broader conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion in organizations?
Yeah, so we are hardwired for story. Stories are how we orient and how we feel safe. They're also how we build trust. So if business moves at the speed of trust moves at the speed of connection moves at the speed of empathy, stories drive empathy. So if we want to understand each other and have more peaceful, harmonious interactions with each other, we've got to share stories of where we come from. We've got to give context to the intersectional nature of who we are. The race, the religion, the economics of how we were raised matters, because once I understand that about you, I'm now open in a different way to hearing perspectives that I wasn't maybe before.
Do you have a view on these stories that are not really matching, that are very famous and part of the culture, but are not really matching the modern times? For example, Snow White being kissed without consent. Should we rewrite the old stories or cancel them or just explain them?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of cancel culture. I think Snow White was written as a historical snapshot of the times. I think it's a great tool to study our own evolution by. We should never cancel it. What we should do is reimagine it. So what would it look like now if a woman needed help? It might look like a community coming together of men and women supporting her and not having to be this damsel in distress saved by a man. And also there's physical consent, but I think what we've now evolved into is also emotional consent. So I think there's always an opportunity to update old stories internally and as a society.
It's time for the harvest of the day. A question I'm going to ask all the guests of this podcast. Can you recall a typical meal you shared with your close one when you were a child? And because the theme of this harvest is radical connection, and you felt very connected. So can you describe me the context, the atmosphere, the company, the food?
Yeah, absolutely. So immediately what comes to mind is tradiție, which is tradition. And my sisters and I would sleep over at my grandparents' house every weekend. We never had babysitters. And we would wake up to this incredible spread of boiled potatoes and salted cured fish. And my grandpa would cure his own salmon. And we would have pilmeni, which are like the Ukrainian version of dumplings, with sour cream and salt and pepper. And there would always be a salad of cucumbers and lettuce and tomato, onion and tomato and sour cream. Sour cream on everything. Sour cream was our
basis,
salt.
okay.
Yes, exactly. So that's what comes to mind. And luckily there's a Ukrainian deli down the street from me in Lisbon. And so when I'm really missing home, I make tradiție for myself.
Were you fighting with your sisters or not?
Absolutely. My sisters and I, we love each other to the death, but we've acknowledged that if we ever met as adults in a bar, we would never be friends. But I think that's what makes sisters so unique, is that they're truly some of the greatest living professors in my life.
And you share so many stories together.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Vika, where can people find you?
Yeah, the best place to find me is on my website, vikatalks.com, because all I do is talk. So that's vikatalks.com. It's also Vika Talks on Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure to have you to be the first one of this podcast for the season 8 of Harvest series. Thank you, Vika.
You're phenomenal. Thank you so much for your heart.